Dead America, Lowcountry Part 12. Written by Derek Slayton. Narrated by Aaron Smith. Chapter 1. Day 0 plus 21. Dante, Lily, Francis, and Maddox walked along a neighborhood street just after dawn. The air was crisp, morning dew still on the grass, and the subtle sounds of zombies tapping at the windows from inside the houses filled the air. "Man, I'd give my right nut not to have to hear that sound anymore," Maddox muttered as he glanced at a large bay window with a zombie family desperately trying to get to them. Lily smirked. "Given what you're packing, that's a small price to pay," she quipped. Maddox bristled, but before he responded, he glanced towards Dante's broad back ahead of him and swallowed his retort. "I'm just saying, it's creepy as hell," he muttered. "If you are feeling adventurous," Francis cut in, "you could always go into the houses and put them out of their misery." The redneck glanced back at the family of ghouls. They looked like they'd been through the ringer, with multiple bite marks and gooey blood smeared everywhere from their smacking and gnashing. He shuddered. "Nah, they can stay right in there," Maddox said. "We already cleared the house of anything useful, so they can keep that room all to themselves." Dante pulled out a crudely drawn map of the area. There were several lines representing streets, and nearly the entire page was filled with X marks. He looked around the neighborhood, trying to get a feel for where they stood on the map. He sighed deeply. "You okay, hon?" Lily asked, stepping up beside him to have a look at the paper. "Yeah, just concerned," he replied. "We've cleared out all these houses already, and we only have this block to go." She offered a reassuring smile. "There are other small towns in the area," she said. "I'm sure we'll be able to find something." "You heard what the QXR mercenaries said. We have to stay put," he replied, shaking his head. "It's too risky for us to be going into other towns and poking around." She reached up, resting her hand on his shoulder. "Henry is making good progress with the gym greenhouse," she reminded him. "We'll have enough to get by soon enough." He looked down at her and smiled, offering her thanks for trying her best to keep his spirits up. Despite her attempts, however, on the inside he was still overly concerned. They didn't have enough food to last them until the food plants were ready to harvest, even with the strict rationing they were undertaking at the school. They would be starving within a couple of weeks. "Maybe one of these people was a survivalist and has a stockpile," he said, pointing at the last block on the map. Lily chuckled. "Not unheard of in these parts," she said. "You two want to start on the other side of the street?" Dante asked, turning to the others. "No problem," Francis replied, raising one of his chainmail gloved fists. "Just clear the houses and do a rough inventory of the food," Dante instructed. "Once we get the block clear, I'll have Ace bring up the truck." The two men nodded and walked off to the house on the far corner. Dante and Lily headed up to their target house, a small one-story brick building. They peered in through the front window, not seeing much of anything. It was just a simple living room that looked like it hadn't been touched in months. Dante led her around the side of the house towards the back, holding his hand up when he heard movement in the backyard. He drew out his knife and quietly crept towards the corner. He peered into the backyard and spotted a lone zombie tangled up in the laundry line. There were still a couple of bedsheets attached to it with clothespins, and the creature flailed about, the wire having broken off at one end and wrapped around its leg like tethering a dog. "I know what you're thinking," Dante joked, "and no, we can't keep him." Lily laughed and pointed a finger at him. "Fair warning, though, if I find a kitten, it's mine." "As long as you give it a proper kitten name, I'm okay with that," he assured her. "None of this hipster stuff like Steve the cat." She put a finger to her chin in thought, cocking her head, and then her eyes lit up. "Professor Mittens?" she asked. "I can live with that," he said, and winked at her before heading into the backyard. The sight of them enraged the zombie, and it shambled towards them. Dante stabbed it in the face effortlessly, dropping it to the ground for good. He wiped the blade clean on the ghoul's shirt before turning back towards the house. Lily stood at the back door peering inside. "Kitchen looks clean, but a little concerning," she said. "Concerning?" he asked, brow furrowing, and approached the door to look in over her shoulder. What's concerning? Look at the kitchen table, she said, and stepped aside so he could get a good look. He turned and sighed at the sight of a single chair at a tiny table. Great bachelor pad, he said. We're going to be lucky if there are a few packs of ramen noodles and some mustard in there. Can't be worse than that canned clam chowder we had last night, Lily scoffed. Why in the hell does that even exist, anyway? Dante shook his head. You should see some of the stuff we have in Seattle, he said. Would make that clam chowder seem like filet mignon. She let out a playful shudder, and then her gaze fell, her lips turning down. What's wrong? He asked, taking her hand. She shrugged. It just hit me that I'll never get to see Seattle, she said. Or New York, or really any place. Come on, you don't know that, he insisted. I'm willing to bet a month ago you didn't know you'd ever be living in an abandoned school and falling head over heels in love with a big city boy, he smirked playfully. She laughed, but it sounded forced. I know you're right, she said quietly. It's just, I always wanted to travel, but I kept putting it off. Now it might be too late. Lily, you have my word that I will show you a big city, Dante promised. Other than Savannah, of course. I'm glad you put that disclaimer on there, because I was going to have to call you on it, she said dryly. He grinned. I would have been disappointed if you didn't, he said. She smiled, a genuine one this time, and then turned back to the door, knocking on the glass. They stood there quietly, listening closely for any noise inside. After a few moments, they heard a bit of movement, but not much. Sounds like one, Dante said, but he seems shy. Let's break him out of his shell, Lily suggested. He flipped his knife around using the handle to smash out the glass. He reached inside carefully, unlatching the deadbolt. I'll take care of him, you see what's in the pantry, he instructed, and she nodded as they crossed the threshold. She headed to the kitchen, and Dante moved through the house, straining his ears for any noise. He finally heard something from the back bedroom as he moved down the hallway and crept towards the door. He looked through the crack between the door and the frame, spotting a lone zombie, what used to be an older male, in the corner of the bedroom. There was no blood on the bed or walls, and as best as he could tell, no wounds on the ghoul. The only thing that looked out of place were the bedsheets, which were a mess on the floor with the comforter. Dante shook his head. The man lived alone, and must have had A-type blood and not even realize what was happening to him. As bad as it was to be eaten alive, there was something especially sad to him about being sick and dying alone in one's bed. He contemplated putting the beast out of its misery, but opted to play it safe, gently closing the door to the bedroom and permanently sealing the zombie in its tomb. He headed back to the kitchen where there was a collection of cheap noodles and canned goods on the table. Lily stood next to it, hands on her hips, shaking her head. We might have enough to feed everyone a meal, she muttered. Dante walked over and picked up a can, reading the label. Enchilada sauce. He looked down and scanned the half-dozen cans of both red and green sauce. Dude really liked his enchiladas, he said. If the power hadn't gone out, we would have had about 10 pounds of beef, Lily said with a sigh. As it stands, I'm pretty sure that freezer is now classified as a biological weapon. He laughed and motioned for her to follow him back outside. As they walked out the front door, Francis and Maddox emerged from their first house. Any luck? Lily called. Francis nodded. Full pantry of stuff, he called back. Looks like they went to the store just before this shit. You? Nothing that good, she replied, shaking her head. He gave them a thumbs up before heading into the second house. Dante pulled out the map and made a few marks where the 2 checked houses were. Maybe the next house will be better, he said. Lily nodded. One can only hope, she replied. Chapter 2. An hour later, the group wrapped up, clearing their final houses. They stood in the street waiting for Ace to come up with the truck. Somebody want to explain to me again why we were dropped off instead of driving ourselves? Lily asked. Henry had to make a run back to my shop, Maddox replied. Some of the, supply was in need of moving. She rolled her eyes. So we're waiting because you needed weed? Fantastic, she drawled. Don't act like you're gonna turn some down when it gets passed around to you, the redneck shot back. Dante raised his eyebrow at her, and she shrugged. I mean, he's not wrong, she said sheepishly. But still, just doesn't feel right to admit he's right. Dante chuckled and checked his watch, noting that it had been 20 minutes since he'd called in to Ace. Christ, man. We could have carried everything back by now, Maddox muttered. Where the hell is he? Patience is a virtue, Francis said gruffly. The redneck jutted out his chin. Do I look virtuous in any way, shape, or form to you? He asked. Trust me, that is something you never have to worry about anyone accusing you of, Lily cut in. Damn straight, Maddox declared. She gaped at him, having a mild aneurysm at the redneck taking her insult as a compliment. But before she could go back into the house looking for ibuprofen, a truck tore around the corner. Ace was behind the wheel, driving fast and honking the horn. All right, which one of you knuckleheads put a quarter in him today? Maddox drawled. Lily and Dante tensed up, wondering what could be wrong that had driven Ace to such panic. He skidded to a stop next to them, and he reached out the window to smack the side of the truck. Everybody in, we gotta move, he barked. What the hell is going on? Lily demanded. Are we under attack? Hell no. It's good news for a change, Ace replied. Come on. The group piled into the truck and he hit the gas, speeding back towards the school at an alarming pace. As he reached the parking lot, he threw it into park and leapt out, waving maniacally. Come on! Come on! He urged. What the hell is going on, cuz? Lily asked as they jogged to keep up with him. I was playing around with the radio this morning, trying to find other people and whatnot, he said as he rushed inside. And I found something awesome. She pointed a finger at him. I swear to God, if it's a stripper, I'm going to cut you, she warned. Bold of you to think I'd share a stripper with you guys, he drawled. Well, what the hell is it then? Maddox demanded. Ace grinned. There are survivors in Florence, he said. The group went silent, stopping short in the gym and staring at him. You're getting this worked up over a survivor that's within driving distance of us? Lily asked, throwing up her hands. He shook his head. Nah, Lil, not survivor, he said. Survivors, plural. And it's a lot more than that, come on. He led them to the radio, where Bailey sat at the mic with her two small sisters. Katie stood next to her, listening and scribbling down notes as they talked. There was a lot of chatter, with a woman on the other end. She sounded older, and she was in the middle of telling a story to the little girls, who seemed amused and delighted. She's almost done, Bailey whispered to the approaching group, and they stopped short so they wouldn't disturb them while they waited. All right, spill it, cuz, Lily said quietly, turning to her cousin. Who are these people? He grinned. It's a whole community of people up there, he said, eyes alight with excitement. I was scanning around and heard this recorded broadcast. They were saying how the town was secure, how they had food and weapons, and that if you were in the area that you should come by. They also gave out a frequency where you could call in. So I did. And that's who Bailey's talking to? Francis asked. Ace nodded. That's Angie. She's like one of the higher-ups in the town, he explained. She said they have dozens of people, food, weapons, and have the place secure. You know they could be just lying their asses off, don't you? Maddox asked dryly. If they are, then they're committed to the bit, because I've heard no less than 5 voices on that radio this morning, Ace replied. Men, women, all different ages. I think this is the real deal. Lily looked to Dante, who looked deep in thought. He finally took a deep breath. Can't hurt to talk to them, he finally said. Not like we have a lot else going on today. And if it is a secure community, we might have an out after we get Grace back. Bailey waved to get their attention and waved them over. And Goldilocks jumped out of the window, running away as fast as she could, leaving the 3 bears in peace. Angie finished. The end. What do you say, girls? Bailey asked. Her 2 sisters said thank you in unison. Oh, you're welcome, girls. I'm glad you enjoyed the story, Angie replied. Bailey smiled. Thank you, she said again. Our leader is here, and I think he would like to talk to you." "Of course," came the reply. "I hope I get to tell your sisters another story real soon." Bailey ushered Hazel and Violet from her lap and out of the way, moving so Dante could take the seat. He leaned forward into the microphone. "My name is Dante," he said slowly. "Who do I have the pleasure of speaking with?"
"Well, hi there, Dante. My name is Angie," she replied. "I'm the personal assistant to Mayor Edgar up here in Florence. But don't let that title fool you. I really run everything."
There was a playful tone to her voice, and he chuckled. "I wouldn't doubt it," he said.
"So I assume your friend Ace has filled you in a bit,"
Angie continued.
"But I am happy to answer any questions you might have about our little community, including the most obvious one."
He nodded. "If you're legit," he said.
"Bingo. There it is,"
Angie replied, clucking her tongue.
"I've put a few other people on the line to show it's not just me jerking your chain. But let's be realistic. We don't have video, and everything I say is going to be taken with a grain of salt, and a whole lot of doubt. All I can do is tell you what I have up here, and if you're interested, you are more than welcome to come check us out."
Katie extended her hand, wiggling her fingers to get his attention. Dante put his hand over the mic. "What is it?" he asked softly.
"Ask her who the mayor is," she said.
He raised an eyebrow and then shrugged, turning back to the microphone. "Angie, this might come off as an odd question, but who is your mayor up there?" he asked.
"That would be Mayor Edgar,"
came the easy reply. He glanced at Katie, and she gave him a thumbs up. "Thank you," he said. "For the time being, I'll take you at your word."
"How gentlemanly of you," Angie said. "Now, Ace informed me that you aren't exactly in a position to be relocating. But are there things you may need?"
Dante chuckled. "It's a zombie apocalypse," he drawled, "so food and weapons are right at the top of the list."
"Oh, honey, you're in the South," she replied with a laugh. "Those two things were at the top of the list before this happened."
There were laughs all around, and then Dante leaned forward again. "I'm from the Northwest," he admitted, "so this is all a little new to me."
"Well, Southern hospitality being what it is, let me assure you that we have plenty of food and weapons," Angie said. "However,"
Dante sighed. "Always a catch, isn't there?" he asked.
"Afraid so, dear,"
she replied, and at least she had the decency to sound apologetic.
"Normally, when people use our goods, we put them to work here in town. Guard duty, farming, stuff like that. But seeing as how you're just visiting, I'm afraid we're going to need something in return for what we'd be providing."
Dante looked around the room, and his companion shrugged. Finally, he leaned in with a sigh. "I'll be honest, we're not exactly flush with supplies over here," he admitted. "I'm pretty sure that whatever we're going to have, you're going to have a whole lot more of it."
"That's really a shame," she replied. "You all sound like really nice people who are in a bit of a bind. But we have to take priority to people who are living in our community. If you happen to find—"
Maddox leaned over Dante and grabbed the microphone. "Do y'all like weed?" he asked. The line was silent, and the group all stared at the redneck, mouths agape.
"What?"
he shrugged sheepishly.
"Had a card to play, so I played it."
Angie cleared her throat.
"I have been advised that, yes, we do like weed," she said slowly. "Assuming, of course, that it is top-quality stuff, and there is an ample amount of it. If you show up with a dime bag filled with stems, we're going to show you the door."
"How about 2 pounds of my Lowcountry lobotomizer?" Maddox asked, leaning over again, and Dante shifted to the side so the redneck wasn't resting on his shoulder. "Hell, I'll even throw in a handful of my cultivated seeds and come up there personally to show you how to properly tend it."
2 pounds, huh?"
Angie asked.
"Yeah, we can work something out for that. Should be able to get you enough food to last until your own garden becomes harvestable."
Dante bumped Maddox out of the way to get to the microphone. "And weapons?" he asked.
"Yeah, we can probably scrounge up a few guns for you, too,"
she replied with a chuckle.
"When can we expect you?"
"Hang on a sec," he said, and then turned to Katie. "I don't know where Florence is." She tapped her pencil on her clipboard. "It's about 150 miles to the north."
she explained. Done a few stories up in those parts. It's a pretty drive.
When are Henry and the others getting back? Dante asked, turning to the others. Maddox checked his watch. Should be within the hour, he said. Dante nodded, leaning into the microphone again. You can expect us mid-afternoon or so, he said.
Perfect, Angie replied. And do you have CB radios in your vehicle?
He nodded. Yes, ma'am, we do, he said.
Fantastic, she said. As a way to spread our message far and wide, we have set up several relay stations, including one to the south of the interstate. So when you get within 70 or 80 miles of us, you should be able to reach us. Just give us a heads up as you're getting closer, so we can let our guards know to keep an eye out for you.
Will do, Dante replied. Thank you.
It's my pleasure, hon, she replied. Looking forward to seeing y'all. Travel safe.
He smiled. Yes, ma'am. He leaned back, switching off the microphone, and turned to the group. So, this is obviously a trap, right? Francis asked. Katie shook her head.
I don't think so, she said.
Why? Because she knew who her mayor was? Maddox asked, shaking his head. That's common knowledge. Lily crossed her arms.
Really?
She asked, cocking her head.
Who was the mayor of this town?
Well, he stammered. I'm not that big into politics.
Katie?
Dante asked, motioning to her. Care to jump in and explain before Maddox's brain starts smoking from overuse? She nodded.
I worked on a story about him last year, she explained. He was 24 and beat a 6-time incumbent for position. Only reason he won was because the mayor was so confident that he forgot to pay the registration fee to get on the ballot. By the time he realized the problem, it was too late. It was a big regional story when it happened, you know, one of those lighter side things.
Yeah, but how does that prove they're legit? Ace asked. For all we know, Angie just happened to watch the news.
When I was setting up the interview, I coordinated with his assistant, Katie continued, a woman named Angie. So either she's legit,
or that's one hell of a coincidence, Dante finished.
Lily took a deep breath. So what do you want to do? She asked.
I say we get a couple pounds of weed and head up there, he said. Maddox shook his head. Nah, you're staying here, he said. Dante furrowed his brow. I am? He blinked at the redneck, confused. Yeah, you are, Maddox declared. This is a weed deal, and I'm a weed dealer. I've handled more daunting tasks than this over the years. When Henry gets back, I'll grab Tate and we'll hit the road.
Katie raised a hand. I'd like to go too, if you don't mind, she said.
Sure, the more the merrier, Maddox replied with a shrug.
Lily jutted out her chin. All right, what's going on? She demanded. Why don't you want Dante to go?
Because if this is a trap and we end up neck deep in shit, I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable knowing Dante's out here and can come get us, he said.
Dante barked a laugh.
I mean, he's not wrong, he said.
Lily tongued her cheek and then pointed a stern finger at the redneck. You just make sure to take that trailer trash girlfriend of yours along too, she said firmly. It's too early in the day for me to be smacking a hoedown.
Okay, Maddox replied with a sneer. But only because you asked so nicely. Come on, if you're making that kind of a trip, we need to get you filled up with gas, Dante said, standing up. There were a couple cars at the houses we hit today. Should be able to pull from it. They headed off, but Dante stopped, turning to glance back at Lily. Do me a favor, he asked. See if you can find a map and trace the route they're going to take. Find any side roads they can take or anything else that might be of use. She nodded.
Worried about QXR? She asked.
I'm always worried about QXR, he muttered. Chapter 3. The QXR command center was abuzz with activity as several mercenaries worked at desks and maps, doing the behind-the-scenes work that made the community thrive. No Name walked in, strolling by the people that didn't so much as look up as he passed. He made a beeline for the conference room where Theo and Mosley had taken up residence. Apologies on being late, the bold mercenary said as he entered. You actually last longer than 12 seconds with your bitch there? Mosley asked with a sneer. No Name didn't even spare him a glance. Still twice as long as you, he quipped. What's on the agenda today, sir? Theo sighed. We're still clearing out the warehouse and doing inventory on what was found inside, he said. However, the generators have been moved into position here on the island. We could use some help getting them hooked up to the grid. My men can handle that, No Name replied. Theo nodded. Shouldn't be too difficult, he said. There were a couple of civilians who worked for the power company, so I have them in charge on site. We'll follow their lead, sir, No Name assured him. Good. That's the priority for the day. So we should. Theo cut off as a mercenary busted into the conference room without knocking. Totally welcome this newcomer to the conversation, Theo said dryly. Please, join us. I am sorry, sir, the mercenary stammered, out of breath. This couldn't wait. Theo crossed his arms. Okay then, what is it? He asked. You know we made contact with the survivor camp up in Florence, the mercenary gushed. Yes, go on, Theo said, waving his hand in the air impatiently. Well, I bluffed about our position, the mercenary said, saying I was in Beaufort with my family, holed up on a small island off of the coast, thinking they'd be more likely to share info with me. Theo nodded. And given how quickly you burst in here, I'm guessing they did? He asked. Yeah, they did, the mercenary babbled. And I just talked to one of my contacts there who said she just spoke with another group in the area. That group is about to make a trip up to see them to make an exchange for food and weapons. Theo's eyes lit up. The people who attacked us? He demanded. Can't know for sure, the mercenary admitted. But there can't be too many survivors in this area we haven't tracked down yet. Figured you would want to know since they're going to be on the road soon. Theo waved him off. Good job, he said. You're dismissed. As the mercenary exited the conference room, No Name straightened his shoulders. I'll assemble my crew, he said. Hell no, Mosley snapped. You fucked this hunt up enough, sir. Send me and my team. No Name swallowed hard, trying to hide his worry. If it was Dante and company, he knew he could hold the leash back if there was a confrontation. Sir, my team is the best tracking unit you've got, he said forcefully. And we know you're softer than baby shit when it comes to civilians, Mosley drawled, rolling his eyes. Sir, if you want this dealt with, you need to send... Theo held up his hands to quiet them both. Do you know why I picked the military over becoming a schoolteacher? He asked, and both men looked confused, shaking their heads silently. Because the thought of getting shot at was far better than the thought of having to deal with whiny prepubescent bullshit like this. Both men withered under his words. Now, No Name is the best tracker I have, so his team is going to handle this, Theo said, holding up a finger to stop Mosley from arguing. That said, if it will appease you to the point of shutting the fuck up about this, send one of your men with them. Mosley puffed out his chest like a peacock. I can live with that, sir, he said sweetly. Theo glanced at No Name, who looked on the verge of objecting. I don't want to hear it, he said firmly. Yes, I trust you, but this makes my life easier, so it's going to happen. Yes, sir, No Name replied, and then turned to his unavoidable co-worker. Have your man meet us by the vehicles in 10. Charlie will be there, Mosley declared. Charlie will be there. Theo waved them off. You have your mission. Go, he said. Keep us informed. Yes, sir, No Name replied, and the two men rushed out of the command center. The bold mercenary radioed to his crew to meet him at the vehicles, while Mosley walked across the way to the mess hall. As he approached, Charlie rushed up and met him at the door. What you got, boss? He asked immediately. Need you to go with that no-named fucker today, Mosley said gruffly, jerking a thumb over his shoulder. Charlie's brow furrowed. What for, sir? He asked. They got a lead on those pricks who keep picking us off, Mosley explained. You're going to be my eyes and ears for this operation, you understand? The younger man straightened his shoulders. How honest do you want me to keep them, sir? He asked. You follow their lead when it comes to popping off rounds, Mosley instructed. Don't give him a reason to kick you off his team. But if you find something, find that he's going soft on them, you give me a beep with this. He handed over a small radio device. Not going to be able to talk over this, but you can send me Morse code messages. It's satellite connected, so you're going to have range no matter where you are. Charlie nodded firmly. "You can count on me, sir," he said. "Whatever I find, you'll know about it." "That's my boy," Mosley said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Now, get moving to the staging area. They're leaving soon." Charlie nodded and raced off to meet up with the team. Mosley smirked and muttered under his breath, "All right, time to see what you're hiding, you bold bitch." Chapter 4. Maddox drove with Tate in the passenger seat, Tegan and Katie sitting in the back. They'd been driving for about half an hour, taking back roads to get around Ridgeland before cutting over to the interstate that would take them directly into Florence. Their fear of running into QXR compelled them to take the longer, safer road. Tegan rolled her window down, sticking out her hand and allowing the wind to move it up and down.
"It is so nice to get out of that hellhole of a school," she said with a sigh.
"That school has kept us safe," Tate said. "You should be thankful."
She rolled her eyes. "I didn't like going to school when it was shiny and new," she drawled. "Living in the gutted remains of one isn't exactly my cup of tea."
Don't be so hard on her, bro," Maddox cut in. "Let the girl live her best life for a little bit. She's grown accustomed to living the good life, being with me. Isn't that right, baby?"
"You know it, hun," she said, voice sickly sweet.
Katie rolled her eyes as she stared out the window, so nobody else could see. She shuddered to think what would qualify as the good life with the redneck couple. Still, she didn't think she was in any place to complain either, since this group had risked their lives to save hers. As they drove, she spotted a road sign for the interstate.
"The turn for the interstate is just up ahead."
"Oh, it is?" Maddox asked. "Thanks, I missed that."
She sighed.
"Just trying to make myself useful," she said.
"Pretty sure you already did that by knowing about the mayor," Tate replied. "I've spent the majority of my time around these two, so it's nice to be amongst people who know things." "Hey, I know things," Maddox protested.
Tate rolled his eyes.
"I mean know things other than weed and pro wrestling."
"Oh," his brother drawled.
"In that case, you're 100% right. Carry on."
The self-deprecating humor caused them all to laugh as he made the turn towards the interstate. Katie turned back towards the window, spotting several zombies wandering across a field. It was just another stark reminder that these things were everywhere, and there was no escaping it. As Maddox turned onto the interstate, he punched the gas hard, wanting to get as far away from Ridgeland as possible. They were a few miles to the north of it, but still too close for comfort. The interstate was mostly clear. However, there were some wrecks on either side. Maddox slowed down as he approached a major one that covered the entire length of the road. As they carefully drove by it, they peered inside the vehicles, some overturned and others crushed by a large transport truck. Behind the windows, several rotted hands pawed.
"Poor bastards," Tate murmured, "running away from something that had already killed them."
Katie shook her head.
"I can't imagine that level of panic. Knowing something is wrong, but not being able to do anything about it," she said.
"Sucks to be them,"
Maddox quipped.
Katie scowled. "So compassionate," she said, sarcasm evident in her tone.
"What?"
he replied with a shrug.
"It does suck to be them. Sucks to be anybody these days."
Tate wrinkled his nose.
"I don't know. Those QXR fellas seem to have it pretty good," he said.
"Yeah, and all we'd have to do is murder and enslave innocent people," Katie quipped.
"Give me a couple of months, and I might be willing to do that if it meant I got a steak," Maddox joked. "Not looking forward to an all-veggie diet."
"You'd think, being southern boys, that you'd do a bit of hunting and fishing," Katie mused.
The redneck laughed.
"Well, you'd be wrong," he said. "If I'm going to sit in one place for 8 hours at a time, I'm damn well going to be high as fuck and not staring into trees waiting on a deer to walk by."
Katie chuckled as the vehicle picked up speed again, once clear of the wreck. Several miles down the road, Tate leaned forward, brow furrowing.
"What the fuck is eating at you?"
Maddox said.
Thought I saw something in the rearview mirror, his brother replied.
Maddox stiffened.
What the fuck did you see? He snapped.
I don't know yet,
Tate said, waving him off.
Just keep driving.
Maddox hit the gas a little harder, picking up more speed. His brother kept his eyes glued to the mirror, finally giving up and turning to look out the back window. Katie and Tegan both turned to look as well, eyes wide with paranoia.
I just saw it,
Katie said.
Saw what?
Maddox cried, agitated.
A vehicle,
she said. He clenched the steering wheel tight, pushing the gas pedal as far as it would go. The SUV roared at near 100 miles an hour.
Slow down,
Tate hissed. Maddox shook his head.
We can't risk them catching up, he replied.
We can't risk wrecking,
his brother argued. Maddox eased off of the gas a bit, still rolling along at 70 miles per hour. This allowed the vehicle to catch up a little, coming more into view.
I got one vehicle.
Katie trailed off and squinted.
No, two.
Well, which is it?
Maddox snapped. She shook her head.
There's two. They're driving in single file.
Gotta be QXR if they're driving information like that,
Tate said.
How the fuck did they find us? Maddox demanded.
Tate threw up a hand.
Who cares? What do we do about them? There's a hunting rifle in the back, his brother said. Katie, pass it up here.
She reached into the trunk of the SUV, finding a couple of handguns, a shotgun, and a hunting rifle. She grabbed it and passed it up to Tate. He checked the magazine.
Extra bullets?
He asked.
Dig through the canvas bag back there,
Maddox instructed, and Katie did so as he checked his rear view to see the two vehicles about half a mile back and gaining. He reached over and hit the button that opened up the sunroof. Tate unbuckled his seatbelt and shook his head.
You should make sure you just hold this thing steady, he warned. I'd rather not fly out and get road rash today. You just make sure you shoot straight, Maddox replied.
Tate nodded and worked his way up through the sunroof, planting his foot on the center console and the other on his seat. As he emerged, the wind was difficult to deal with, and it took him a moment to steady himself and raise his weapon. He aimed as best he could, getting the lead SUV in his sights. Finally, he got his crosshairs in the middle of the engine block and fired. He couldn't tell where the bullet ended up, but since the vehicles weren't slowing down, he assumed he'd missed. He aimed and fired again, this time seeing the front windshield spiderweb from the impact. The vehicles slowed down a bit, one of them veering off of the road and crossing the grassy median to speed alongside the opposite side of the road.
I think I pissed them off,
Tate yelled. Maddox sped up a bit, getting in a wreck the least of their worries in that current moment.
Katie, I need a handgun,
he snapped, and she scrambled to grab one, passing one up with an extra mag.
You girls get down and stay down, this could get messy.
They lowered themselves onto the floor of the back seat, keeping their heads down as low as they could. Maddox hit the button for his window as he checked the side mirror. The vehicle on the other side of the road was picking up steam and was within a couple 100 yards of coming alongside them. Maddox looked back to the road, spotting an exit 4 miles away for St. George.
Tate!
He yelled. His brother fired off another shot and then knelt down.
What?
He demanded.
There's a town up ahead, and we're going to take the exit, Maddox said.
Are you fucking crazy?
Tate cried.
Yeah, I am, his brother admitted. But we have to do this.
Before Tate could respond, bullets peppered the back of the SUV, metallic pings loud in their ears.
If we don't lose them, they're going to pick us off, Maddox urged.
I'll be ready for the swerve,
Tate relented. His brother nodded.
When you hear me honk, you open up on the SUV behind us, he instructed.
Got it,
Tate agreed, and popped back up, keeping his aim at the back. Maddox looked in his side mirror, seeing that the opposite lane vehicle was nearly upon them. Their windows began to roll down, but before mercenaries could emerge, he stuck his gun out the window and squeezed off several rounds. The aim was less than desirable, but the threat of being shot prompted them to back off a bit. He looked up and saw the exit was 2 miles away, the SUV starting to pick back up its position with 2 men hanging out the windows.
They're going to fire on us, so be ready,
Maddox barked. Tate fired a few more times, trying his best to keep the SUV behind them at bay, but it continued to pick up speed. However, So far, nobody had poked their heads out to return fire. Maddox kept his eyes trained on the road, counting the seconds until they were at the exit, which was less than a mile away. Bullets impacted the vehicle from the side as the SUV regained its position. Finally, Maddox had the exit in his sights, just up ahead, and it was on a downward slope to the road below. Off in the distance to the right, he spotted some small neighborhoods containing God only knew what. It didn't matter, though, because it was better than what they were currently dealing with. "Get ready!" he barked and honked the horn, prompting Tate to unload the remainder of the bullets in his magazine. Maddox opened fire on the other SUV with his handgun out the window, causing it to swerve. As soon as it did, he cut the wheel hard to the right, causing the SUV to veer off onto the exit. As he did, Tate fired off one more shot, hitting the front of the vehicle right behind them. The driver slammed on the brakes, partially because of the shot and partially because of the exit. Tate knelt down, dropping the rifle next to him and holding on for dear life. Maddox cut the wheel hard to the right, nearly flipping the vehicle over. He managed to get a hold of it, punching the gas and speeding down the road towards the small neighborhood half a mile away. Tate kept his eyes peeled on the interstate, waiting for QXR to follow them down. He was relieved that they were able to make it to the houses before their pursuers could follow. Once they made the turn, he quickly ducked back into his seat. "They didn't follow us, although I'm pretty sure they will," he said. Maddox didn't respond, instead focusing on driving through the neighborhood. There were several zombies around, wandering through yards and on the street. He took special care to not hit any of them, not wanting to give away their position. Finally, he spotted an open garage door with a few ghouls in the driveway. He made a quick turn up the driveway, hitting the gas and smacking into one of the corpses, stopping only once he was inside the garage. "Get that body and take out the other one quietly," Maddox instructed, and both men leapt out of the vehicle. Tate ran up to the still shambling zombie and cracked its skull with the butt of his rifle. He grabbed its legs and dragged it inside as Maddox did the same with the other downed creature. Once inside, they both jumped up and grabbed the door, pulling as hard as they could on it. It was stuck, due to being motorized, so Maddox did the only thing he could think of, which was shooting the chain with his handgun. One single shot, which nearly deafened all of them, but it did the trick, sending the door slamming down. Tegan flopped out of the back seat, holding her head. "That was so loud," she whined. "My ears are ringing." Maddox clamped a hand over her mouth, holding a finger to his lips. She nodded, scowling as he pulled his hand away. Tate kept watch on the road through a small crack in the garage door. After several moments, he spotted an SUV slowly roll by. The windows were down, and armed mercenaries had their guns out at the ready. They slowed down further when they rolled past the house, but picked up speed towards the next block. Tate let out a sigh of relief and then turned back to the others, as Katie crept out of the vehicle. "They rolled past," he whispered. Katie approached him, keeping her voice low. "So what do we do now?" she asked. "We get inside the house and make sure we're alone here," Maddox replied and pulled out his knife. Tate followed suit with a nod. "Wait here," Maddox said, and Katie and Tegan leaned against the back of the SUV. Maddox cracked open the door to the house, and he and Tate headed inside. It was dark, only illuminated by the soft glow of the sun against the curtains. The interior was a mess, showing massive signs of struggle. Tate pointed to a hallway for Maddox to check as he headed into the living room. As he approached the turn for the living room, he heard shuffling. He readied his knife, quickly turning the corner to find two ghouls on the other side of the room. Tate thought quickly, getting behind a recliner and waiting for the zombies to get to him. As they approached, he lunged forward, jamming his blade into the first one's forehead. The downed creature slumped face first into the chair as the other one continued to press forward. Tate stepped around the chair and slammed his blade into the side of the other one's head. A moment later, Maddox entered from the back hallway. "We're clear," he said. Tate nodded before going to the garage and waving Katie and Tegan inside. The quartet congregated in the kitchen, which was clear of blood and zombies. They took a seat at the kitchen table and Tate opened the pantry, finding some bottles of water. "You know they're not going to just give up and go away," Katie said quietly, as she accepted one of the bottles with a nod of thanks. Maddox sighed. "Yeah, I know," he replied, "but this at least gives us a chance to catch our breath." "We're going to need a plan other than catching our breath." Tegan muttered as she opened her own bottle.
Again, I know, Maddox said with a sigh. I'm open to suggestions.
Tate walked over to the living room window, peering outside through the side of the curtain so he couldn't be seen. He listened as the others bickered and tried to figure something out before coming back.
Where's the radio? He asked.
Maddox furrowed his brow.
The what?
He asked.
The CB radio, Tate replied. We might be close enough to Florence that relay station could pick us up.
It's in the SUV, Katie said, jerking a thumb over her shoulder. She led Tate out to the garage and slid into the passenger seat, digging the CB radio out of the glove box. Tate slipped it on and tried the designated station.
Florence, do you copy?
He asked, but there was nothing but static.
Florence, this is your weed dealer. Do you copy? We're in trouble.
There was more static, and he tossed the receiver down onto the floorboard in frustration.
We're not close enough, Katie murmured.
He ran his hands through his hair.
Then we better figure out some way to get close enough, he growled, and led her back into the kitchen. Well? Maddox asked.
Tate shook his head.
Too far away, he said.
God damn it,
Maddox cried.
What are we going to do?
Tegan whined.
We can't outrun them forever.
And we sure can't stay here, her boyfriend added.
Katie chewed her lip for a moment, racking her brain for anything that might help. After several moments of tense silence, she snapped her fingers.
We haven't gone over a big bridge yet, have we?
She asked. The others stared at her, confused, and then slowly shook their heads.
I mean, we've gone over a few bridges, Tate said, but not any I would call particularly big.
Then we've got to be close, Kate mused.
Maddox cocked his head.
Close to what? He asked.
Lake Marion,
she replied. The trio still looked blank.
Okay,
Tate asked slowly.
There's a giant bridge, Katie explained,
eyes alight with excitement and hope.
Like 2 miles long over it. The 2 lanes are both split up, so if we can keep them both on our side of the road, we might have a chance to hold them off.
Maddox threw up his hands.
What do you mean, hold them off? He demanded. How the hell are we going to do that? It's not like we have a 50 cal machine gun here.
We know we aren't packing much heat, but they don't, she said. If we can just get across, block the road and open fire, we might just be able to hold them off.
Tate shook his head.
Okay, let's say we do that. Then what? He asked.
You think they're going to just shrug their shoulders and walk away?
No, they're going to do something drastic and overtake our position. They're highly trained mercenaries, not pushovers.
They're just like us, Katie said firmly. They want to survive. We have enough firepower to hold them at bay, at least for a little while. We're just going to have to hope that we're within range of the relay station.
Maddox sighed dejectedly.
So we can call for backup, he said.
He shook his head.
Shit,
Tate trailed off.
You think it's a good idea, don't you?
Fuck no, I don't, his brother admitted. But it's the best we got at the moment.
But what if we get there and we're not in range?
Tegan demanded.
Katie shrugged. Then it's no different than if we just stay here or try and outrun them, she said. We die.
Tegan shook her head furiously, gripping her hair through her fingers. Maddox reached out and pulled her close to him, kissing the top of her head and whispering comfort in her ear.
All right, Tate said with a sigh. We have something resembling a plan. Let's give it some time, let them hopefully move on to a different neighborhood. Not to mention give us a chance to catch our breath.
Chapter 5. A half hour later, the quartet was still tense inside the house. Ever since that first vehicle had gone by, they hadn't seen another sign of life outside of the handful of zombies wandering by in other yards. Maddox watched out the front door, with Tate at the back. The girls sat at the kitchen table playing some cards to pass the time, and keep Tegan from freaking out. Katie felt like she was more than capable of helping out, but keeping the redneck woman occupied seemed to be the most valuable job at the moment.
You got anything up there?
Tate called softly.
Haven't seen anything in a while, Maddox replied. You?
Tate shook his head. Just some zombies in the next yard.
I think we should get moving, Maddox said.
Tegan stiffened. Just like that? She asked shrilly.
Yeah, baby. We can't stay here forever, he said, approaching her and wrapping a thick arm around her shoulders.
She gasped in a deep breath. But...
Don't worry, I'll keep you safe, he cut in, running a finger down her cheek. I want to do a check first, Tate said as he approached from the back door.
A check for what?
Katie asked as she gathered the cards into a neat little pile. The main road is just a few blocks over, Tate explained. I can cut through the yards and look up to the interstate, see if they're blockading it. Or, God forbid, blocking the exit to the neighborhood.
Tegan clutched Maddox's shirt tightly. Is there not another way to get to the interstate? She asked. I mean, we took the long way around to get to it the first time. Not the worst idea I've heard, Katie murmured.
Problem is, we don't know where we are, Maddox pointed out. If they do get wind of us and get us on these back roads, we're toast.
Tegan lowered her gaze and nodded. He gave her a tight squeeze before disengaging her hands and heading over to Tate, who was at the back again, studying the zombies in the yard.
What are you thinking? He asked quietly.
His brother took a deep breath.
If I cut up on the left side of that house, he said, motioning, I should be able to get through without them noticing.
He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small walkie-talkie.
You got yours? He asked.
Got it in the car, Maddox replied.
Stay on channel 10 and be ready to move, Tate instructed. If it's clear, you come pick me up at the entrance to the left, and we're hauling ass.
His brother nodded. We'll be ready, he said firmly. Tate drew his knife, slinging his rifle over his shoulder, and then slipped out the back door. Maddox secured it tightly behind him before motioning for the ladies to follow him to the garage. Tate stayed low, moving quickly across the yard towards the next house. There were half a dozen zombies within his view, but none of them within 10 yards of the path he was taking. His footsteps alerted some of them, but he paid them no attention, instead focused on moving fast. He reached the front of the next house, taking a knee by the side of it to survey the situation. He looked up and down the side road, seeing dozens of ghouls spread about, but no sign of QXR. Just as he was about to dart out and race to the next row of houses, the ones that faced the main road, he dove down behind cover as a zombie rustled the bushes near him. He gripped the knife tightly, readying to strike as the ghoul lumbered forward towards him. As it stumbled around the corner, he delivered a quick strike to one temple, pulling out the blade and shoving the ghoul back to the grounds, concealing it behind some bushes. Tate took a quick look again, making sure the coast was clear, seeing that the fallen zombie had alerted some of the other creatures nearby. He didn't waste any more time, busting out from cover and racing across the street. He reached the next house, lowering himself again as he approached the side of the road. He looked to the right, away from the interstate, and spotted several ghouls all walking away from him.
That's odd, he thought. It's like they see something.
He stayed behind cover and then flinched at the sound of a gun going off.
Shit! It's QXR.
He looked down towards the interstate, seeing that the path was clear. He quickly retreated back towards the road where several ghouls that had been pursuing him were now shambling off towards the gunfire. When he reached the front of the house, he ran towards the street they'd come in on. He pumped his legs hard, the sound of his feet on the grass attracting corpses, but he didn't have any other choice. As he reached the corner house, he dove behind cover, running in between the last two houses. When he reached the alley between them, he came face to face with 3 zombies within 5 yards of him. Tate was moving too quickly to avoid them, awkwardly stumbling into the leader. He was fortunate that he'd had enough speed built up and weight to him that he crashed through them, sending them both toppling over to the ground. He scrambled to his feet, almost crawling along the grass as the other 2 standing ghouls grew closer. He secured his footing and blindly swung his knife as he turned, stabbing right through the cheek of the lead creature. Not killing it, but at least sending a few rotting teeth flying out of its head. He reset himself, stabbing at the zombie's face, this time hitting it directly in the forehead and killing it. Rather than let it drop, he grabbed it by the shirt and shoved it back into one of the others. This gave him the opening to deliver a kill strike on the fallen ghoul he'd run into,
and then swing around to dispatch the last remaining zombie. With the threat neutralized, he breathed heavily for a moment to regain his composure, and then quickly shook himself and took off sprinting once again. He stopped at the mouth of the alley and peered up and down the street, thankful to see no sign of QXR. He pulled out his walkie-talkie. "Get a move on, now," he hissed. "Come up the road we came in on." "On the way," Maddox replied immediately, and Tate shoved the radio back into his pocket and drew his rifle. He checked it to make sure a round was in the chamber as he kept a close eye on the road for mercenaries. A few moments later, he heard the engine getting closer and prepared himself to get in. As soon as Maddox screeched to a stop in front of him, Tate tore from cover, throwing open the door and diving inside. "Go, go!" he screamed. "We got company?" Maddox asked as he punched the gas. "Far end of the neighborhood," Tate huffed, "but we should have a clear shot at the interstate." Maddox didn't waste time, barreling around the corner back onto the main road. The engine whined as it picked up speed, moving quickly towards the interstate. Tate looked back over his shoulder, spotting one of the QXR vehicles pulling out from the neighborhood in pursuit of them. "We got a follower," he warned. "Shit, that's not all we got," Maddox said, and his brother turned around to face the front, spotting another SUV emerging from the other side of the bridge. It picked up speed, and Maddox continued to do the same. "I'd buckle your seatbelts if I were you," he warned. Tate's eyes widened as he scrambled to get his seatbelt done up. "Oh shit. Chicken?" he asked. "They have us outgunned, so if we stop here, we're dead," Maddox said. "If they don't get out of the way, at least we'll take some of them with us." Tate nodded jerkily. "I can live with that," he said. Maddox stayed in the right lane, picking up tremendously dangerous amounts of speed. The other SUV did the same, getting right in front of them. The quartet grew tense as they got closer, bracing for what they thought was an inevitable impact. Maddox opened his mouth and bellowed a battle cry as they grew closer and closer. Finally, at the last second, the QXR vehicle veered out of the way, spinning out on the road and allowing them to pass. The rednecks all whooped in celebration as Katie clutched the back of Maddox's seat with white knuckles, face still pale as a sheet. "Floor it!" Tate cried, and Maddox made the turn onto the interstate, picking up speed. Within seconds they were pushing 90 miles per hour and putting some distance between them and their pursuers. As they went, Tate reached into the glove box and picked up the receiver to the CB radio. "Florence, do you copy?" he asked, but there was nothing but static. "Damn it, I was hoping the flat interstate would get us some better reception." "Just keep trying," Katie said. "We'll get them." "Wish I shared your optimism," Tate said dryly. Maddox kept the pedal to the metal as they pushed on towards the bridge. Katie kept a keen watch on their rear for the other vehicles, which would catch up sooner or later. Several tense minutes went by before she spotted them on the horizon. "I can see them," she said. "How close?" Maddox asked, not wanting to look away from the road for even a second at the speed he was going. "Maybe a mile or so," Katie said. He looked at the speedometer, seeing he was pushing 100. The front end of the vehicle started to shake a bit under the stress of the speed. "Where the hell is this bridge?" he demanded. "We gotta be close," Katie insisted. "We're more than halfway to Florence, and I swear it was around this point in the trip." "You'd better be right," he said. She continued to watch the vehicles trailing them, still about a mile back. Maddox was able to deftly navigate the occasional broken-down car, despite screaming down the interstate at breakneck speed. "Fucking finally!" he groaned when he spotted the start of the bridge. "Get to the other side of it and stop," Tate instructed. Maddox furrowed his brow. "Why not the middle?" he asked. "Because our goal is to trap them, not ourselves," Tate snapped. Maddox nodded. "Good point." He drove across the bridge, reaching a point where they could see water on both sides. It was a sprawling view, the sun reflecting on the water, and it would have been beautiful if it weren't for the fact that they were being pursued by murderous trained killers. As they approached the end of the bridge, a broken-down truck came into view on the shoulder of the road with a zombie by the back tailgate. "Pull up beside that thing," Tate cried. "We're going to need the cover." "On it," Maddox replied, and began to decelerate, cutting the wheel hard. He nearly hit the back end of the truck as he came to a stop, blocking off the entirety of one lane and the shoulder. "Everybody out, now!" They piled out through the driver's side, quickly taking cover behind the SUV. Tate rushed over to the back end of the vehicle, aiming and firing towards the vehicles approaching on the road. He squeezed off several shots before they stopped a couple 100 yards away. A few moments later, return fire came their way, and they all ducked down. "Get on the radio!" Tate barked. Katie stayed low, reaching inside of the SUV and grabbing the CB radio. She quickly flicked it on and started talking. "Florence, are you there?" she demanded. "Over." A few seconds passed before a static-filled response came through. "This is Florence. Who is speaking?" Katie let out a noise of victory, and then replied, "This is Katie. We're from Bluffton and headed your way with a weed shipment. You're expecting us, but we need help." There was more gunfire from both sides, as well as screaming from Tegan, who was curled up on the ground behind the driver's side wheel, covering her head with her hands. "I hear you, Katie," the voice on the other end said calmly. "Can you tell me where you are?" She looked around frantically, spotting a sign in the distance. "We're at the large bridge over Lake Marion, by Adams Landing," she said. "We have people shooting at us, and don't know how long we can hold them off." "Understood," the operator replied. "Hang tight. Help is on the way." Katie dropped the CB radio and crawled back out of the vehicle. "Well?" Maddox asked as he fired off a few more shots. "They said help is on the way and to hang tight," she replied. The bullets finally stopped, Tate still aiming at the two vehicles in the distance. "Always my favorite part of anything," Maddox muttered. "Hurry up and wait." Chapter 6. About 45 minutes into the standoff on the bridge, No Name and Kemp ducked down behind a single wheel well. The rest of the team, Levi, Wyatt, Grayson, and Charlie, huddled behind wheel wells of the other vehicle. The action had been quiet for the last 15 minutes or so, with no shots coming their way. Kemp glanced at the others and then leaned into No Name, keeping his voice low. "Figured out a plan yet?" he asked. "Still working on it," the bold mercenary murmured. "We can't hang out here forever, you know," Kemp hissed, "especially with Mosley's man over there." No Name rolled his eyes. "Gee, thanks. Didn't realize that," he drawled. "I'm serious, Commander," Kemp urged. "This could get real bad real quick if we don't do something." "Are we going to do something about this situation?" Charlie called from the other vehicle. "They haven't fired in quite a while. They gotta be out of ammo by now." No Name shot him a glare. "By all means, son. Poke your head up and find out for yourself," he said with a wave of his hand. Everyone looked at Charlie, and he bristled at the attention. Finally, he decided to stick his head up. As soon as his eyes cleared the top of the hood, a shot rang out, smacking into the vehicle and forcing him back down. A few of the men laughed at him. It seemed even the men loyal to Theo weren't thrilled about Charlie's presence on the team. "Don't worry, they got one less bullet now," No Name called. "You keep that up and they'll be out before you know it." Kemp let out a soft sigh. "Hopefully that will calm him down a bit," he murmured. "He's not going to stay quiet too much longer," No Name said. "Commander, we may have to take these people out," Kemp whispered. "I know it's not what we want to do, but if we get busted—" "Yeah, I know," the bold mercenary muttered. "Commander, we have activity," Grayson called. The duo peeked up from their seated position, looking through the glass of the SUV to stay somewhat concealed. Another vehicle drove up from the far side of the bridge and parked behind the civilians. "Well, this is new," Kemp said. "Somebody from Florence send them reinforcements?" No Name sighed. "Could be," he said. "Why aren't we attacking them?" Charlie cried. "Now we have more of them to deal with." "Unless you want to see how deep that water is down there, I suggest you shut the fuck up," No Name barked. Charlie slumped a bit at the scolding and closed his mouth. "If it's reinforcements, we might be in for a fight," Kemp said. No Name nodded. "Didn't expect that," he said, and pointed towards the civilian group. A large black man walked towards them, holding up a white shirt. He had both his arms up and moved very slowly. "That's a new development," Kemp said. No Name glanced at his team just as Charlie rose to his feet, holding his weapon.
"Wyatt!"
the bold mercenary called.
"If that idiot beside you so much as thinks about raising his weapon, I want you to pop him in the head with your sidearm."
"Yes, sir," Wyatt replied, glaring at Charlie with his hand on his gun. The latter lowered himself back to the ground dejectedly. Kemp took a deep breath. "So, what are you going to do?" he asked.
"Well, he wants to talk. Let's go talk,"
No Name replied, setting down his weapon and raising his hands.
"If things go south, you peg him first," he said quietly.
"With pleasure, Commander," Kemp replied, tightening his grip around his gun. No Name stepped out, and when they were within speaking distance, he stopped.
"Don't believe I've seen you before," he said.
"Sorry, was a little late to the party," the man replied with a smirk.
"No apologies necessary," the bold mercenary said. "I'll just assume your invite got lost in the mail."
The man nodded.
"Appreciate the courtesy," he said.
"Do you mind telling me who you are?"
No Name asked politely.
"Captain Terrell Graham," came the reply.
No Name nodded thoughtfully.
"Captain, huh?" he asked. "By the looks of you, I'm guessing Marines?"
"Delta, actually,"
Terrell replied. The bold mercenary blinked at him, impressed.
"Delta, huh?"
he asked, then let out a low whistle.
"I don't say this about a lot of people, but you boys are some bona fide badasses. Ran a couple of missions with some of your friends over in the sandbox. At first, I was kind of insulted we were only in a support role, but after seeing what you could do, goddamn. It was like having courtside tickets to watch Jordan play. Just magical."
"Appreciate the compliment," Terrell replied with a nod. "So, you spent some time in the sandbox, huh?"
"Did 3 tours for Uncle Sam, and another 2 tours with my current employer," No Name said. "I'll let you guess who paid better."
Terrell chuckled.
"I've seen my bank statements. I don't have to guess," he said.
The bold mercenary smiled.
"Crazy world, huh?" he asked. "One day we're fighting insurgents in the desert half a world away, and today we're on opposite sides of a bridge in a zombie apocalypse."
"Crazy is one word for it," Terrell said dryly.
"So, Captain," No Name said with a sigh, "you tell me what I can do for you."
His tentative acquaintance waved a hand over his shoulder.
"These kids you're chasing," he began. "Now, I don't know what they did to piss you off, or what your employer told you to do, but I would very much appreciate it if you'd let them come with us. The people who asked me to negotiate on their behalf seem very eager to have them arrive in one piece."
No Name stroked his chin.
"You're going to be putting me in a tough spot there, Captain," he said slowly.
"I have no doubt," Terrell replied, "which is why I'll consider it a personal favor."
No Name nodded. A personal favor wasn't something lightly given out.
"I can live with that," he said. "I have a lot of respect for Delta and what they went through over there, so you can take them."
"Appreciated," the captain replied with a relieved smile.
"However," the bold mercenary continued, "you should know that there are others who work for my employ who don't care about anything that took place before this shitstorm started. So it would be in your best interests to steer clear of Hilton Head Island and the rest of the Lowcountry."
Terrell jutted out his chin.
"If I didn't know better, I would think that was a threat," he said.
No Name shook his head.
"No, sir, not a threat," he said. "Just a warning. The men under my command share my sentiments. However, I only have a very small command."
Terrell gave him a knowing nod, extending his hand to shake.
"Good luck with your employer," he said.
"Good luck to you too, Captain,"
No Name said, and turned to walk back to the group, motioning for them to load up and head back.
"Who the hell was that, Commander?"
Grayson demanded. No Name raised his chin.
"Delta,"
he simply said. "What in the hell is Delta doing out in these parts?" Grayson asked. "And what the hell do they want with them?" The bold mercenary shook his head.
"Didn't ask," he said. "All I know is they're here, and our day is done."
"You're just going to let them go?" Charlie snapped. Yes, we are, No Name replied, his glare like ice. I don't know if you've ever seen what Delta can do, but I can guarantee you that you don't want them to be going against you. He waved off Mosley's dog. Come on, let's head back. He and Kemp got into their vehicle, while the rest piled into the other. As they got moving on the road, Wyatt glanced over at Charlie, who had his hands in his shirt pocket, wiggling them around. You all right over there? Wyatt asked suspiciously. Charlie sneered and pulled out a small stress ball and gave it a good squeeze. Helps me stay calm, he said. Wyatt shrugged. I opt for a flask, but you do what you gotta do, man, he replied, and looked out his window, ignoring Charlie's covert messaging with his other hand in his shirt. Chapter 7. Maddox drove while Terrell rode along with Tegan, Katie, and Tate in the back seat. The captain's comrades were in the vehicle ahead, leading the way to Florence. Man, I don't know what you said to that douchebag, but we can't thank you enough, Maddox said. Terrell nodded. So, what are y'all going to Florence for? He asked. Just dropping off some of my, special smokable blend, the redneck replied. Cut a deal with the mayor for some weapons and other supplies. This have something to do with Hilton Head Island? The captain asked. The vehicle went dead quiet, and then finally Maddox asked, What do you know about Hilton Head? Not much. I was just warned to stay away from it, the captain replied. Maddox shook his head. Well, you're a badass, so it's not a surprise they'd want to keep you away from that little dictatorship, he drawled. Dictatorship? Terrell asked, brow furrowing. What the hell are you talking about? Maddox sighed. Before the end, Hilton Head was a rich folks' retreat, he explained. A lot of wealthy New Yorkers and other Northerners would come down for the summer and take it over. Just so happened that a lot of them were in town for a winter getaway when things went bad, so they took over the island. With a handful of ex-military mercenaries? The captain asked, jaw dropping. They have a small army, Maddox replied, shaking his head. 100, maybe even hundreds, don't know for sure. Frankly, none of us have really wanted to get close enough to count. At least not recently. Terrell cocked his head. Then why are they after you? He asked. We bumped heads a couple of times, Maddox replied. Over what? The captain demanded. Maddox sighed. A couple of people in our camp back in Bluffton have family and friends who were enslaved on the island, he said. Terrell clenched his jaw, his eyes full of rage. Did you say enslaved? He asked. Yep, Maddox replied, shaking his head. Hundreds of them. Clearing and fortifying the island, even forcing them to do the dangerous jobs like clearing out zombie-infested buildings. How big is your army? Terrell demanded. The redneck winced. Not very, he admitted. If I'm being honest, the weapons we're trading for are for defense. We're just trying to hold on to what little we got and not be crushed. Some in our camp are understandably gung-ho about getting their people back, but I just don't see it happening. Not unless something major happens. You might just get the help you need, Terrell declared as they approached the exit for Florence. You don't leave this town until you talk to me again. Got it? Maddox nodded like a bobblehead, hope rising in his chest. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, the captain replied. Still got 2 others to convince. They got off of the interstate and parked on the side of the road. As they got out, Terrell waved to 2 soldiers off to the side and headed over to them. Maddox opened the back of the SUV and handed the bags of marijuana to Tegan and Katie. Oh, it is so good to see you here in one piece, a familiar woman's voice sounded, and the redneck turned around to face Angie. Wouldn't have been able to do it without you, he said. Tate shook his head. Where the hell did you find those guys anyway? He asked. They rolled into town today, she explained. Apparently been fighting it out with some nasty guys up north. They didn't talk too much about it, but from the sounds of it, they've had a rough few days.
They really the badasses they claim to be? Maddox asked quietly.
They brought in another survivor who saw them in action, Angie replied. Hasn't shut up about them the whole day. So yeah, I'd say they are. Said they fought off a whole squad of killers that were after them.
Tate shook his head. Killers everywhere, he said, letting out a deep breath. Whole world is falling apart, man.
The world may be, but we're an exception, Angie said with a smile. Come on in.
She led the group through the heavily fortified front gates of Florence. The quaint small town had a large fence erected all around the downtown area, providing a safe place for residents. The group looked around in amazement at the sights. Kids played in the park, vendors set up in the street like it was a fair, and there were numerous armed guards set up along the fence.
I have to say, Katie breathed, this is quite impressive. Well, thank you, dear, Angie replied with a smile. We've worked hard and paid a steep price to get to where we are.
She led them to a small office a block away from the activity. As they entered the building, a young-looking man came out of the back. He grinned and bounced forward with high energy, shaking everyone's hands.
Welcome, welcome, I'm Edgar, he gushed. So glad you made it here.
Maddox nodded.
So are we, he said.
Really appreciate the assist, Tate added.
Of course, the mayor replied. These are tough times, and we all need a helping hand.
Tegan and Katie stepped forward, setting 2 large bags of weed on a desk. He peeled one open and took a deep whiff and grinned. He pulled out a nugget and inspected it.
This looks like some top-quality stuff, he said.
We have one of the best growers in the region, Maddox explained. I guarantee this stuff will stupefy you.
Edgar packed the bag back up and gave him a nod.
Going to be a relaxing evening, that's for sure, he said.
I believe you had something for us as well, Tate asked.
Of course, the mayor replied and pulled out a radio, raising it to his lips. Front gate, please load up the designated goods into our guests' vehicles.
A voice quickly replied,
Yes, sir.
Edgar set the radio on the desk.
Got a handful of weapons and enough food to last you all a while, he said. And if this stuff is as good as you claim, we'll be open to more trade down the road.
It is, Maddox said proudly, and we look forward to another deal. Let's just hope next time we don't end up in a standoff, Tate muttered.
Edgar nodded.
Agreed, he said. May I ask you a question? Katie asked.
The mayor smiled at her.
Of course, he said. Would you object to me staying behind? She asked. I would like to see what your community has to offer.
He nodded thoughtfully.
You're welcome to do so, but be warned, we will put you to work, he said. I'm not afraid of a little hard work, Katie assured him.
Tate turned to her, putting a hand on her shoulder.
Are you sure?
He asked.
Yes, she said firmly. You are in for a hell of a fight, and I'm not a fighter. If this place is all it seems to be, it might be a good idea to get Bailey and the girls up here too. They don't need to be exposed to what's coming. Oh, those cute little girls I told a story to? Angie asked, clapping her hands together. They are welcome here any time.
Katie smiled.
I appreciate that, she said.
Well, Maddox said, reaching out and patting her on the back. You know how to reach us, so don't be a stranger.
She nodded.
I won't be, she promised.
Come on, we got a long drive back,
the redneck said, and then turned to shake Edgar's hand.
We really appreciate it.
It's our pleasure, the mayor replied. You drive safe now.
The rednecks walked back outside and headed off towards the front gate, watching as it opened when they got close. They spotted someone just shutting the trunk of the SUV, having it loaded up with all kinds of goods.
Looks like this was worth the trip,
Tate said excitedly.
Maddox nodded. Now we just got to get back safely with it, he said with a sigh.
As they approached the vehicle, Terrell sauntered up with his 2 soldiers.
Tate grinned. Don't suppose you want to escort us back home, do you? He joked.
As a matter of fact, we do, the captain replied. The rednecks blinked at him.
You do?
Tate stammered.
Absolutely, Terrell replied.
After being told what's going on down there, we just can't stand for it. We're going to come lend a hand. Maddox took a deep breath, shaking his head. "Thank you," he said. "Don't mention it," the captain said, waving him off. "As far as introductions go, this is my right-hand man, Coleman." The soldier to his left grinned and waved. "Pleasure," he said. "And this young firebrand is Miles," Tyrrell continued, motioning to the soldier to his right. "Good to meet y'all," the shorter soldier said. "So, y'all are badasses, huh?" Tate drawled. "You don't know the half of it," Miles said with a lazy grin. "Whatever problems you have going on, these two here will solve it real quick." Tyrrell chuckled. "Don't sell yourself short," he said. "You can throw down too." "Well, I'm not one to brag," Miles scoffed, waving him off. "Bullshit," Coleman said brightly. "You've only been with us a few days, and if I had a bullet for every time you've bragged, I could clear the country of these things." Miles wrinkled his nose and chuckled. "Trying to turn over a new leaf," he said. Laughter rippled through the group, and then Maddox jerked a thumb over his shoulder. "Well, we've got a long drive ahead," he said. "We should get to it. Tyrrell, if you want to ride with these guys, I'll ride with Coleman and Miles," Tate suggested. "Good time to get to know each other and provide directions if we get separated." The captain nodded. "All right. Let's load up and head home." Chapter 8. Mosley barked orders to 10 men as they loaded up the gear into 3 SUVs. "All right, listen up," he finally bellowed, holding out his hands. "We got a line on the fuckers who have been shooting up our boys, and we're going to deal with them." Adams raised his hand as he turned away from the SUV. "What kind of numbers are we looking at?" he asked. "According to my intel, we're dealing with 1 vehicle of people," Mosley replied. 4, maybe 5. "Armed?" Adams asked. Mosley nodded. "Minimally," he said. "Rifle and small arms, nothing heavy." "Where are we hitting them?" Adams asked. "North of Ridgeland," Mosley explained. "They know we have a presence there and aren't going to go further south than that. There's a highway feeder road about 5 miles north of town that we think will be their turn. We're going to block it off and force them into town." Adams nodded. "Ambush?" he asked. "Absolutely," Mosley replied. "Your team will be the blockade and pursuit. I will lead the other 2 teams to the north part of town, set up some crossfire. We'll cut 'em to shreds before they even know we're there." Adams pointed to 2 nearby men. "You 2, with me," he said. Mosley handed him a map, and the trio piled into one of the SUVs and took off. He turned to the rest of the remaining men, crossing his arms. "All right, now listen up," he said. "There is still a heavy zombie presence in Ridgeland, so we're going to have to stay quiet until it's time to not stay quiet. Understood?" The remaining 6 men all replied, "Yes, sir," in unison. Mosley grinned. "Okay, let's roll." Chapter 9. Tyrrell was in the lead vehicle with Maddox behind the wheel. Tegan sat alone in the back seat, her window rolled down with her hand flowing in the wind. "We're getting close to Ridgeland, so we need to start keeping an eye out for trouble," Maddox said. Tyrrell nodded. "Is Ridgeland bad?" he asked. "We ran into some trouble with QXR up here," Maddox explained. "Don't know if they've moved in, but we're not taking a chance." "Nothing wrong with a little bit of backroading," the captain agreed with a nod. He grabbed the walkie-talkie communicator on his vest and hit the button. "Coleman, we're approaching potential trouble. Stay alert," he said. "You got it, Cap?" Coleman replied. Tyrrell checked his assault rifle, making sure the magazine was full. He checked his sidearm, leaving it resting on his knee. He rolled down the window just in case, having gone from laid back to steel-focused. "Where's the turnoff?" he asked. Maddox tilted his head back and forth. "Few miles up," he said. "You don't take that exit unless I tell you to," Tyrrell said firmly. "Got it?" The redneck furrowed his brow but nodded. "Got it," he said. "And you be ready to punch it if I give the signal," the captain added. Maddox looked in the rearview mirror, and Tegan caught his eye, rolling up her window without being asked to. The captain kept his eyes peeled, a 1,000-yard stare on the side of the road. He glanced over at the concrete median on the interstate, deciding it was unlikely an attack would come from that side. The mood in the SUV grew tense as he stared out the passenger window. They passed a sign that read "Exit 1 mile," and he cocked the hammer back on his handgun. Several seconds went by, and then Tyrell spotted it, a glint of a bumper behind the exit sign, barely showing through the bushes. He reacted before speaking, quickly raising his gun and squeezing the trigger several times. "Floor it! Floor it!" he yelled. Maddox punched the gas, and Coleman did the same in the SUV behind them. They sped right past the exit, and within seconds the SUV parked behind the sign careened out from cover. Two mercenaries stuck their heads out of the windows, one on each side of the vehicle, and opened fire on them. Tyrell smacked the button on his radio. "Take him out!" he cried. He looked out the side mirror and spotted Miles leaning out the passenger window, opening fire on the pursuing vehicle. While the bullets only found the front end of the SUV, it forced the two shooters back inside. "Tyrell, we got a problem," Maddox warned, panic rising in his voice. The captain turned back to the front and saw the road was blocked off with cars just past the exit. "Shit," he muttered. "What do you want me to do?" Maddox asked. "Take the exit and don't slow down," Tyrell instructed, and then hit the radio button again. "Coleman, we're going into Town Hut. When we get to the exit, break left. We're going right. If there's more of these assholes, let's take them out." "You got it, Cap," Coleman replied immediately. Maddox punched the gas, making the SUV go as fast as it possibly could. He made the turn for the exit, a downward slope leading to a frontage road and turnoffs. When they were halfway down, an SUV reeled out from underneath the bridge, stopping in the middle of the road. Two armed men popped out of the passenger side windows, armed with assault rifles. "Everybody down!" Tyrell yelled. He ducked down, and Maddox did as well, keeping just his eyes over the dashboard so he could see where he was going. Bullets ripped through the front windshield, shattering the glass and peppering the seats. Maddox managed to scrape by the vehicle, steering just around the front of them and staying on the frontage road. Once past, the captain popped up and watched Coleman's vehicle following them along the same path. Tate sent a shotgun round into the front windshield of the attacking vehicle as they drove by, sending blood splattering all over the place. "Attaboy," Tyrell whooped, and then his face fell when he noticed Tegan. She hadn't gotten down fast enough, and had caught several bullets that had ripped through the seat. There were several wounds on her chest, and one through the forehead. The saving grace that she'd been killed instantly. "Where am I going?" Maddox demanded. "Turn right, at the next road," Tyrell said, his demeanor solemn. "Stop as soon as you make the turn." The redneck gave him the side-eye. "What is it?" he snapped. "It's your girl, man," Tyrell said apologetically. "I'm sorry." Maddox checked the rear view, seeing only the badly mangled corpse of his girlfriend. He let out a yell as he made the turn, slamming on the brakes as per his instructions. Tyrell immediately leapt from the vehicle, aiming his assault rifle at the road. Maddox, however, crawled into the back seat, gingerly touching Tegan's face. "Baby," he whispered, "I don't know what to do. There's nothing I can do." The captain remained focused, watching as Coleman made the turn on the road headed in the other direction. "Far right," he called. His man complied, putting his vehicle to the far side of the road, half on the sidewalk. A few seconds later, the pursuing vehicle made the turn and Tyrell opened fire. Bullets ripped into the back window of the SUV, as well as into the back of the passenger side gunman, who fell limp, dropping his weapon to the pavement. The other one on the driver's side attempted to return fire, only to take a bullet in the chest. The SUV quickly swerved, careening into a yard and rolling behind a house for cover, the lifeless bodies flopping in the windows. The captain leapt back into the SUV, Maddox still in shock in the back seat. He grabbed the redneck's collar and dragged him up into the driver's seat. "She's dead, and so are we unless we move. Now!" Tyrell barked. Maddox nodded jerkily and let out another yell before situating himself and hitting the gas. He drove down a few blocks before turning left, speeding towards the downtown area. As they grew closer, they spotted dozens of zombies spread out in the neighborhoods and in the street leading towards the shops. Maddox gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white. Terrell reached over and grabbed his shoulder. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said forcefully, "and we'll mourn after we get out of this. But right now we need a plan. Do you know where we're headed?" "Downtown shops," Maddox babbled. "Alleys, elevated positions." There was a thump at the front of the vehicle as a body bounced off of the grill. "And zombies," he added. "Until we know how many of them there are, having some distractions will be good," Terrell said. He hit the button on his walkie-talkie. "Coleman, you're good?" he asked. "Yeah, we're good, Cap," Coleman replied. "Thanks for the assist." "Any time," Terrell said. "Where we headed?" Coleman asked. The captain took a deep breath. "Downtown," he instructed. "First street with stores. I want you to get an elevated position. We're not going to be the only things they're fighting, so shoot to wound." Coleman chuckled. "You got it, Cap," he said. The line went dead as they approached the turnoff onto the main street of stores. There were about 50 zombies there, and Terrell looked around, pointing to a lamppost across the street. "Crash into that post," he instructed. Maddox gaped at him. "What?" he demanded. "Not that hard, just enough to leave a dent," Terrell urged. Maddox shook his head and then veered towards the post, smacking gently into it. As soon as he did, the captain leapt from the vehicle, doing a quick sweep of the area. There were a handful of ghouls within 20 yards of them, giving them a few moments to act. He ran towards the closest one, raising his rifle and firing a single round through its head. As it dropped, he grabbed it, dragging it back to the vehicle quickly. "What the hell are you doing, man?" Maddox asked, shaking his head wildly. "Making it look like we had a wreck and had to go on foot," Terrell grunted as he dropped the body next to the vehicle. "We need them to come down this way if we're going to get the upper hand." He used the butt of his rifle to smash the front windshield. "Help me get him up here." Maddox grabbed the zombie by the feet, and Terrell smacked it down on the hood, making it look like it had come flying into the driver's side windshield. The redneck shut the door behind them, but Terrell shook his head. "Gotta leave it open, man," he said sadly. "But Tegan," Maddox trailed off helplessly. "Is dead," Terrell said. "We have to make it look like we fled. I'm sorry, man." The redneck growled, but he understood, begrudgingly nodding his head and leaving the door open. Terrell turned and scanned the far side of the street, looking at all the stores. Finally, he honed in on a hardware store about half a block up. "Hardware store," he said. "Let's go." Maddox reached back into the vehicle, grabbing his hunting rifle and a handful of mags, pausing to take one last look at his dead girlfriend, before shaking his head and sprinting after the captain. As they ran, Terrell drew his handgun and popped a few zombies in the head as they ran by, creating a trail of corpses in their direction. The noise attracted zombies from down the street, moving them in their direction. Even so, they still had a good 20 yards of clearance between them and the nearest ghoul on their path to the store. When they reached the door, an older wooden one with glass at the top, Terrell aimed once and fired a single round into the window. It shattered, raining down into the store and on the sidewalk. He quickly reached in and unlatched it, throwing it open. "Sweep the place, and I'll handle the door," he instructed. Maddox rushed through the room, clearing every aisle. Terrell locked the door as the zombies outside grew closer and closer. He looked around, finally locking his eyes on a riding lawnmower display. He rushed over and pushed it until it was securely against the door, and then pulled the emergency brake once it was in place. "Not perfect, but it'll do," he muttered. "We're clear in here," Maddox said as he approached. "Fantastic," Terrell replied, and hit the button on his radio. "Coleman, what's your 20? He asked. "I'm on the roof at the far end of the street," came the immediate reply. "I can see your vehicle and the crowd amassing around the store." The captain nodded. "And the others?" "Tate and Miles are in the store below me," Coleman replied. "Whistle down to them," Terrell instructed. "Need them to fire off a few rounds to pull some of the heat off of us. Those mercenaries aren't going to come for us if they think the zombies have us pinned down." "I'm on it," Coleman said. Terrell motioned for Maddox to follow him away from the door and off to the side of the room. They took up position beside the large display window, looking back towards their SUV. Several zombies poured at it, presumably trying to get inside Tegan's body. Maddox swallowed hard, glaring at the sight. "I need you to do me a big favor," Terrell said, putting a hand on the redneck's shoulder. "Can you handle that?" Maddox took a deep breath and nodded. Yeah, man. What? He asked. They might try to flank us, the captain said. I need you to cover the back entrance. The redneck stood there for a moment, dead-eyed as he continued to stare at the SUV. Finally, he gave a jerky nod and turned away from the window. Yeah, man, He took another deep, ragged breath. I'll cover it. Good stuff, Tyrrell said, and clapped him on the back before the redneck jogged to the back. The captain sighed and turned back to the window. He didn't have to wait long as 3 SUVs pulled up. One of them was missing its front windshield, which Tyrrell assumed was the one Tate shot out with the shotgun. One of the others had bullet holes in it, the third unscathed. We're live, Coleman, Tyrrell said into the radio. What you thinking, Cap? Came the immediate reply. Tyrrell paused for a moment, contemplating the situation. Can you signal Miles silently? He finally asked. I'm concealed pretty good, but they know if they hear banging on the roof to start shooting, Coleman explained. Tyrrell nodded. Good. Get them firing, he said. With any luck, it'll draw these assholes down the street towards them. The mercenaries squeezed off a few rounds, killing some of the ghouls that were getting too close to them. 4 of the 7 men spread out on the road, creating an armed barrier between them and the other 3. A few moments later, Miles and Tate began firing. Immediately, the 4 mercenaries flinched and turned their attention towards the enemy. Behind them, a man that was presumably the leader of the squad started yelling and motioning for the men to strike. The 4 in the lead took off running, while the other 3 remained behind. The strike team moved quickly, firing off the occasional shot at the zombie, but for the most part rushing by them. When they get parallel to my store, Tyrrell murmured into the radio, you plug the second from the left in the leg. You got it, Cap, Coleman replied quietly. Tyrrell readied his assault rifle, watching as the 4 mercenaries moved swiftly through the throng of zombies. There were about a dozen pressed up against the glass where he was, but the group immediately behind them turned their attention towards the freshly moving quartet of zombie chow. A couple more shots went off from the distance, but it didn't deter the mercenaries. They reached the hardware store completely oblivious to his presence, and then a powerful shot boomed in the distance. Almost simultaneously, a kneecap exploded, and the wounded mercenary screamed in pain, dropping to the ground and bonking his head off of the pavement. Contact! Contact! One of his companions cried. The 2 men on the outer edges of the street raised their weapons, trying to get a lead on the source of the attack. I don't see him, one of them cried. Another booming shot went off as Coleman punched one of his sniper rounds through another man's upper thigh. With 2 men on the ground, the other 2 began firing blindly downrange. Elevated! Elevated! One of them barked. They raised their aim, firing off shots. As this was going on, their wounded comrades began to cry out as zombies closed in on them. One of them pulled out his sidearm and began firing at a group of 6 ghouls that converged on him from the rear. He managed to hit one in the head, but in his panic seemed to find it difficult to find his target. Get me out of here, man! He screamed. Get me out of here! The man on the far side of the road moved to aid him, but another sniper shot rang out, hitting the ground just in front of him and forcing him back. This allowed the zombies to collapse on the injured man, his frantic gunshots turning to screams. The creatures tore into his legs, tearing his flesh, and he kicked, shooting them at point-blank range even as they gnawed his limbs. The other injured man lay shaking, a giant pool of blood forming on the pavement from his leg and head. He tried to raise his weapon, hand trembling as he managed to fire one shot at a pair of zombies coming for him, but his arm went limp immediately after. He was too weak to even scream as the ghouls tore into his body. As the mercenary by the window aimed at his fallen comrade to destroy the threat of a runner, Tyrrell took aim at him. He waited for the man to complete his shot before pulling the trigger himself. The firing went off almost in unison, 2 heads exploding as one, and thankfully the glass didn't shatter, simply a small hole appearing in it. The last remaining mercenary on the advance team across the street saw the exchange, however, and raised his weapon to fire. Before he could, a grenade came flying in, clinking on the ground. Both men quickly ducked for cover before it exploded. Shrapnel and decaying body parts flew through the air, destroying the glass at the front of the hardware store. Tyrrell hit the ground hard, a little stunned from the shockwave and blast. He quickly snapped out of it as soon as zombie hands caressed his feet. He looked down at a few ghouls laying on their bellies, reaching out and crawling towards him, fingers groping at his boots. He kicked his heel against the floor, shoving them back. He managed to put enough distance between him and the zombies so he could pull out his handgun and fire. 2 quick shots eliminated them both. Several more assault rifle shots went off outside, and zombies in the window fell from the blasts. A sniper round boomed, and the remaining mercenary on the road fired into the window. Tyrell raised his handgun, trained on the enemy as they locked eyes, spotting each other with their barrels aimed. "Cap, you got incoming!" Coleman's voice came through the radio. "Cap! Cap!" Tyrell raised an eyebrow at the mercenary, gun still aimed at him. "You mind?" he asked. "Have at it," his enemy replied. Tyrell pushed the button with his free hand. "Appreciate it, Coleman, but I'm aware," he said, and then lowered his hand, addressing the mercenary. "So, now what?" "Unless you think you can hit me in the head," the man replied, patting his bulletproof vest, "I suggest you put it down and come with me." "And if I say no?" Tyrell asked. "Then I just put you down right." A bullet went through his head, and Maddox emerged from the back room with his rifle in his hand. "That's what you motherfuckers get!" he bellowed. Tyrell scrambled up off of the ground, rushing to the window. The gunfire and noise had attracted quite the crowd of zombies, all within 5 yards of them. He turned and shoved Maddox away from the front. "Back door! Back door!" he cried. As they bolted for the back room, he hit the button on his chest. "Coleman, we're coming your way, back alley!" There was a reply, but the running and moans drowned it out. Tyrell was a few yards behind Maddox, who rushed to the back door and threw it open. As soon as he burst outside, he flew sideways, hit in the side of the head with the butt of a rifle. A beastly mercenary stepped into the doorway, aiming his rifle down at a woozy Maddox, and Tyrell lowered his shoulder and threw his body forward. The impact was violent, both men flying back into the alley. The mercenary's head slammed into the wall, and he brought an elbow down onto Tyrell's back to make him back up. The mercenary tried to lift his rifle, but the captain was able to smack it away just as a shot went off, hitting the side of the building. Tyrell stepped in and hit his opponent on the wrist, causing him to drop the weapon. The mercenary took the chance to punch Tyrell in the side of the head. The captain staggered as stars exploded, but lunged forward with several quick strikes that hit the mercenary's upper torso and face. The mercenary was forced to step back and regroup, attempting a punch in the process. Tyrell ducked back to avoid it. "You got a little fight in you, boy," the mercenary drawled. "I like that." The captain's eyes darkened. "You know you killed an innocent girl back there, right?" he snarled. His opponent smirked and pulled out a large blade, twirling it around his fingers playfully. "Yeah, well, if it's any consolation, she isn't going to be the only one I kill today," he said with a sneer. "Is that a fact?" Tyrell taunted, raising an eyebrow. "Very much so," the mercenary replied. "I'm gonna gut you with this knife, and then I'm gonna—" Tyrell cut him off with a quick-draw bullet to the kneecap. The mercenary screamed, and his knife clattered to the ground. The captain holstered his gun before smacking on the now-closed back door of the store. He peeked inside at the small army of zombies marching through it. Within 10 yards of him, he looked down at the mercenary, who was attempting to get up on his good leg, grunting away. "Sit your ass down," Tyrell snapped, and drew his gun again, firing into the other kneecap. The man screamed again, flopping back down onto the pavement, throwing his hands over his eyes. Tyrell turned to Maddox and hooked an arm under his armpits to help him stand up. "You good?" he asked. "Just another concussion," the redneck drawled, wavering a little. "Had a few, huh?" Tyrell asked with a wry smile. Maddox shook his head. "So many that I've forgotten just how many," he slurred. "Yeah, they'll do that to you," the captain said, and led him down the alley. At about 20 yards away, the mercenary began screaming anew, this time in fear. Tyrell looked back over his shoulder as zombies poured out of the door, diving on him, teeth gnashing. The captain pressed the button on his chest. "Coleman, where are those other 2 assholes at?" he asked. "They booked it out of here," came the reply. Tyrell nodded. "Good. We're on our way to do the same," he said. "We'll be ready," Coleman assured him. The duo hobbled to the end of the alley, stepping out onto the road. A moment later, Coleman pulled up in the SUV, and Tate leapt out of the back seat.
"Holy shit, bro. What happened?"
he gasped, taking the brunt of his brother's weight from Terrell. Maddox mumbled something incoherent, and Tate's eyes widened. "Just the concussion," Terrell assured him. "He'll be fine." Tate nodded as he helped Maddox into the back seat, and then turned around to scan the area, brow furrowing in confusion. "Where's Tegan?" he asked. The captain shook his head, and Tate's face fell.
"Damn it,"
he muttered with a sigh, hanging his head. "If it's any consolation," Terrell piped up, "she went quick." Tate shrugged, rubbing his forehead. "That's something, I guess." "Come on. We gotta get out of here," the captain said, and got into the passenger seat. "Stop by the wreck. I gotta get the other vehicle." Coleman nodded, and they headed off. Another battle survived, but at a steep cost. Chapter 10. Mosley busted into the command center, the door slamming against the outer wall.
"Where is that bold motherfucker?"
he yelled.
"I'm gonna whoop his ass when I get my hands on him."
The computer workers all froze, staring at him with wide eyes. Mosley grabbed the closest one by the collar.
"Where's that no-named bastard at?"
he bellowed. The man winced at the spittle flying into his face, and then slowly raised his hand, pointing at the conference room. Mosley shoved him back against his desk, and then stormed to Theo's office, throwing open the door and stomping over to the conference table.
"You goddamn cocksucking son of a whore!"
he snarled, leaning over the table and glaring daggers at No Name, who calmly remained seated.
"I ought to kill you where you sit."
He reached for his sidearm, but Kemp was quick to his feet, drawing his gun and putting it against the offending mercenary's temple. "I would strongly advise against that," he said coldly. Mosley sneered, looking around the table at No Name's whole team, including Charlie. "Okay, let's take it down a notch here, people," Theo said, spreading his hands and waving them all down. "Kemp, how about putting down that hand cannon there? I would really hate to have to be out of my new office for a few days while someone repaints the walls to cover up Mosley's brain. Plus, paint fumes make me woozy." Kemp hesitated, but finally holstered his gun and sat back down in his seat. "And Mosley, if you even think about drawing your gun in here, I'm going to let Kemp do what he's got to do," Theo continued, pointing at his still fuming subordinate. "Understand?"
"Yeah,"
Mosley muttered. "So, what's the bug up your ass?" Theo asked, crossing his arms. Mosley pointed to No Name frantically.
"This asshole got 8 men killed today,"
he cried. The bold mercenary raised an eyebrow, looking around at his team with more than a little amusement in his eyes. "I brought back everybody I left with today," he said. Mosley smacked his hands down on the table.
"Motherfucker, you know exactly what I mean,"
he snarled. "I assure you that I do not," No Name replied calmly, face betraying nothing. Theo sighed heavily. "In the interest of moving this conversation along," he said loudly, "why don't you just tell us what's on your mind?"
"I know for a fact that they let the civilians go today,"
Mosley said petulantly, jabbing a finger in No Name's direction.
"We found out the hard way when we intercepted them north of Ridgeland. They took out 8 of my men."
Theo's brow furrowed, and he turned to No Name. "Care to explain?" he asked in a level tone. "Of course," the bold mercenary replied flippantly. "As I was saying in the debrief, we tracked them to a neighborhood where they managed to bust out back to the interstate. A short time later, we crossed a bridge only to find that they were set up at the end and began firing on us, creating a standoff. As we were formulating a plan of attack, reinforcements arrived." "Reinforcements?" Theo asked, shaking his head. "From where?" "I assume Florence," No Name replied as Mosley vibrated with rage on the other side of the table. "Large contingent?" Theo asked. "Overwhelming force?" No Name shook his head. "Just one vehicle," he replied.
"So why the fuck didn't you take them out right then and there?"
Mosley roared, shaking a fist. Theo held up a hand to calm him. "I can handle this, Mosley," he said with warning in his tone. "He does make a good point, though. he said, turning back to No Name. One of them approached with a white flag, so I went and talked to him, the bold mercenary replied calmly. This may be the apocalypse, but some things are universal. Theo nodded. Agreed, he said. Continue. We exchanged some pleasantries, and he asked if I would release the civilians into his custody, No Name said simply. His boss raised an eyebrow. And you did? He asked. No Name nodded. Yep, he said. Well, what in the fuck did you do that for? Mosley exploded. The bold mercenary didn't even flinch. Because he was Delta, he said. The room fell silent as the words sunk in. Theo began to pace back and forth, clasping his hands behind his back. Delta? He muttered. What in the world would Delta be doing down here? Could somebody in the government know about what we're doing here and be trying to put a stop to it? No Name shook his head. I didn't get that sense at all, he said. They just seemed like they were there for the civilians. Them? Theo asked, halting his pacing to look at his man. There was more than one? No Name nodded. Couldn't get a firm number, but at least 2 or 3, he replied. And you're certain they were Delta, Theo reiterated. He had the look and the swagger, so when he said Delta I didn't put it past him, No Name explained, and then shrugged. Of course, seeing how Mosley got his ass handed to him despite having a clear advantage in numbers, I'm very convinced now. You motherfucker, Mosley growled. You gotta put an end to that. Shut it, Theo snapped. If Delta is in the area, then we have to proceed like they are here for us. From this moment on, all non-essential off-island activity is suspended. Harden the bridge defenses, and I want covert monitoring stations set up to keep watch on the likely observation points. If they are here for us, then they're going to do recon before making a move. No Name nodded. I will get it set up, he said, getting to his feet. The team joined him, Charlie included, and Kemp stepped into his path, staring him down. We can handle it, he said coldly. I have orders to stay with your team, Charlie replied, jutting out his chin. Kemp glanced at Theo, who waved him off. Seeing as how Mosley here seems to have lost men of his team, I want Charlie to stick with yours for the time being, he said flippantly. Charlie smirked, but Kemp turned on his heel and joined the others as they filed out of the room. Theo snapped his fingers and pointed to Mosley. You, he said firmly, stay. Looks like someone has to stay after class, Kemp mocked as he reached the door. Fuck you, Mosley growled, and then threw himself into one of the empty chairs. Theo leaned on the table, staring down at him with an icy glare. So, you want to explain to me exactly why you took 2 squads of my men out for an ambush? He demanded. Hell, let's back up a second. You want to explain to me exactly how you even knew to take 2 squads of my men out for an ambush? Mosley raised his chin. Charlie, he said simply. Theo sucked in his cheeks for a moment, looking his subordinate up and down. He leaned back, crossing his arms as he leaned casually on the table. You put a spy on his team? He asked. Yes, sir, I did, Mosley replied. Theo raised an eyebrow, not having to ask for an explanation. After seeing the way Baldy there treats his prisoners, helping them out and whatnot, I started getting suspicious, Mosley continued. He's supposed to be a highly trained tracker and he can't find some civilians hiding out? I don't buy it. Theo's brow furrowed. You think he's working against us? He asked. Hell yeah, I do, Mosley shot back. You have proof? Theo asked. No, his subordinate stammered. Not yet. Outside of him not taking out those civilians on the bridge, that is. Theo clucked his tongue. Seems to me that not engaging Delta was the right move, he said, raising an eyebrow, as what's left of your team can attest. Mosley scowled into his lap. Yeah, you're right, he muttered. You're making serious accusations here, Theo said firmly. Until you have absolute proof, you don't mention this to a soul, understood? His subordinate nodded begrudgingly. Yes, sir, he muttered. Now I'm going to keep Charlie on No Name's team, Theo said. When you talk to him, make sure he knows not to do anything stupid. If No Name is working against us, I need to know, especially with Delta in the area." Mosley nodded like a bobblehead. "When I know something, you'll know something, sir," he promised. "Okay," Theo said. Dismissed. Mosley got out of his chair, walking out of the conference room with a satisfied smirk on his face. "I'm coming to get you, Baldy," he thought triumphantly. "I'm coming to get you." Chapter 11. Tate drove the lead vehicle, while Terrell and Coleman followed in the heavily damaged SUV. They headed down the driveway of the school, pulling up just a few yards from the front entrance. As they parked, Dante and Lily emerged to greet them. Maddox was the first one out of the car and stalked past them, almost catatonic and staring into the distance. Lily glanced over her shoulder at him and then shook her head.
"About time y'all got back," she called. "We're starting to get worried. You get some good stuff?"
He didn't respond, and simply disappeared into the school, leaving the door swinging wide open.
"What the hell, man?" she called. "You just ignoring me now?"
She opened her mouth to say something more, but Dante grabbed her arm. "Lily," he said softly, and turned her towards the vehicles, where a group of people got out with Tate, and only Tate.
"Where's—"
She trailed off and then swallowed hard.
"Oh, God."
Tate approached her and patted her on the shoulder. "You may want to go easy on him for a while," he suggested.
"Yeah, I will,"
she replied, nodding jerkily. Tate looked up at Dante and inclined his head in the direction of the new trio. "I think the odds of you getting Grace back just went up exponentially," he said, patting the larger man on the shoulder and heading to the school. He let out a loud whistle as he entered. "Hey, Scam, the rest of you lot, come on. We got stuff to unload." Dante and Lily approached the newcomers, and he extended his hand. "I'm Dante, and this is Lily," he said. "It's a pleasure," Terrell replied with a smile. "I'm Captain Terrell Graham. This is my right-hand man, Coleman, and this is my, left-hand man, Miles." There were chuckles all around, and they all nodded, exchanging more handshakes and greetings. "We talked to Katie on the radio," Dante explained. "We really appreciate you guys coming to their rescue." Lily smiled.
"And appreciate it even more that you came down here," she added.
"When we heard what was going on with the island, we decided to do something about it," Terrell said firmly. "Just didn't feel right to sit by and do nothing." "The help is very welcome," Dante replied, "because the odds are stacked against us." Terrell nodded and then held up a hand. "First things first," he said. "Does anybody from QXR know about this place?" "Yeah, this big bald dude," Dante replied. "Pretty sure he's on our side, though." The captain nodded thoughtfully. "Ran into him earlier today," he said. "I got the same feeling. Anybody else?" "I don't think so," Dante replied, shaking his head. "Unless he spilled the beans." "Just to be safe," Terrell said, and inclined his head. "Coleman, I want you on the roof keeping watch. Miles, see what you can do about securing the perimeter." Miles turned to Dante. "Do you have any sort of workshop here?" he asked. "Tool shed, maintenance room, anything?" Lily jerked a thumb over her shoulder. "Yeah, we got a good amount of supplies," she said. "Come on, I'll show you." She turned and gave Dante a light touch on the arm as she went by, and he smiled softly at her before she left. "She your lady?" Terrell asked as the two walked off. Dante shrugged sheepishly. "Something like that," he said. "Sorry for prying," Terrell said slowly, motioning to his face. "But combat?" The scarred man shook his head. "House fire," he said. "Ran in and pulled my sister out." "Brave with no regard for your own safety," Terrell replied. "I can work with that." Dante straightened a touch. "I may not be military, but I can hold my own," he said firmly. "Got more than a few QXR goons in the ground who can attest to that." "All right, I can work with that," Terrell said, raising his palms. "Why don't you show me what you know about the island, and we can start figuring out how to get your sister back?" Dante grinned. "With pleasure." They headed into the school with a lot of work to be done, a member of the group to be mourned, but for the first time in a long time, a sense of hope in the making. The end. Up next, with new help and a renewed sense of hope, the group begins to figure out their next steps in Lowcountry, Part 13.